So let me introduce you other first. So there's Emmanuel from Uganda, and then there's Jackie from Tanzania, and there is Fitsum from Ethiopia. Each of you practicing tax in different areas. You get to introduce yourselves a bit. So what we normally do is that we record these conversations, put them on YouTube. And then the other thing I was telling Emmanuel is that we're trying to look for maybe a better, easier way for people to join in the calls. People tend not to like to join the call on Skype. They prefer to either go on the live stream on the website, through the website webinar page. So there's normally quite a bit of people there. So that's what we normally do. We stream both. Yeah. So don't worry if there's on Skype, there are just normally few people who join, and then on the webinar page you find there's more people there. But the difficulty is that you're unable to interact as much with the people who don't like joining on Skype call. We're still trying to find a way of what is more preferred. But if we could go directly to it, and start by Emmanuel, if you could introduce yourself and your practice areas.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Rathumio Emmanuel. I'm a lawyer with a specialized training in taxation. My keen interest is with international taxation. Mm-hmm. However, I deal a lot in structuring tax compliance issues. Mm-hmm. I'm based in Kampala, Uganda. That's me.
Okay. Thanks, Emmanuel, for that. And thanks for joining in the discussion. Jackie, if you could introduce yourself.
My name is Jacqueline Matiko, a lawyer specializing in tax as well. I do, from my practice areas, I focus mainly on advisory, which covers quite a bit, and litigation as well as compliance. But the biggest chunk is tax advisory, which will take all your M&As, your advisors, and everything there. I am based in Dar es Salaam, and I work with a law firm called East African Law Chambers.
Cool. Jackie, thanks a lot for joining in, and we look forward to this discussion with you. Fitsum, if you could introduce yourself and your practice areas as well.
All right, thank you. My name is Fitsum Miley. I'm certified accountant, and mainly I'm engaged in tax advisory and to some extent what tax compliance. So main engagement is on tax advisory, and I'm based in Addis Ababa.
Okay, nice to have you, Fitsum. So if I could also quickly mention what we're trying to do at Africa Asia and how this came about. So what really happened is that there were different people from different African countries with different interests, and we got to speaking and thinking, if there could be a platform where people from different African countries who are like-minded and who have an interest in a common area, if they could speak to each other and get to know each other and exchange ideas and know what's happening in each other's countries, that would be really great. And then that's how we thought, let's actually try and come up with such a platform. And then what has been happening is that we've been having different discussions, and there's been a bias on tax, and that's because I'm a tax practitioner myself. So that's the area that I found easier to start having discussions on. But there's been quite a big interest in tech, and so the discussions will either be on tax or technology, or either at a general topic of affecting Africa, like the Africa Continental Free Area Agreement. So such conversations that either have an affecting the whole of Africa, or conversations within an area of interest. But those are the three main areas that we either focus on. You either find that we're discussing something on tax, or we're discussing something on technology, and it could be digital, cryptocurrency, or innovations happening within Africa, or other times we'll be discussing a topic on Africa in general, which is also very limited either on the continental free area or cryptocurrency in Africa or that kind of thing. But it's normally quite business related kinds of topics that we discuss. Okay. And having said that, we could go directly to the topic of discussion today, which is on tourism and services and how Ethiopia, Uganda and Tanzania would be working to revive those sectors of the economy, especially the COVID. So if we could start with Tanzania, Jacqueline, if you could tell us a bit, is tourism a big contributor to the Tanzania economy? And what is greater? Is it the domestic or is it international tourism? And how has COVID affected it, if at all?
Thank you. So in Tanzania, yes, tourism contributes quite a big chunk in the economy. For the recent numbers that we have, I think those will be the 2018 numbers. The tourism sector contributed to about 17% of the GDP, which was around, I think, $2 billion. And over the years, particularly in the past couple of years, we've had a tourists board, which has played quite a significant role in trying to help the sector grow even further. And in a way, I would say that it has paid off, because before COVID, the number of tourists had really gone up. And in 2019, I think there was an index that was issued, a travel and tourism competitive index that was issued, and Tanzania was ranked among the 10 countries which had a very high growth of the tourism. Like most African countries, the tourism is mostly, the contribution in the sector is mostly from foreigners as opposed to locals. There's still some contribution from locals, but mostly it's from foreigners. But with the unfortunate event of the COVID-19, there has been quite a slowdown, I would say. And since the borders were closed for, I think, about 2 months, somewhere between 2 or 3 months, thereabout. So there was a significant drop, which has affected, because there are some regions, for example, if you're talking about regions like Arusha, which significantly depend on tourism, with most people being either directly or indirectly involved in the sector. And on that, you're talking about the tourist companies, you're talking about the hotels, and different service sectors were significantly affected, because because of all the airports and everything, there weren't any people really coming in other than the local tourists, which aren't as many. And even when you have those, there may be a bit of contribution to the tourist companies, but when you're talking about the service sectors, they aren't getting really as much, because if these people are local, then they probably won't be utilizing most of these services as much as the foreigners would have had.
Okay.
But at the moment, we have our borders, and both the ministry and the tourist board are trying to advertise as much as possible. And we have seen in the news that people have started to come in, but since unfortunately this issue has affected the entire world, that the inflow of tourists hasn't been as it would have been expected, and we still expect it's probably going to stay like that for quite a bit, because the impact is not really just for Tanzania, if you put it that way. But then when you're talking about the impact, you're also considering there are challenges in some countries. Most countries that still have their borders locked. So even if you have opened, like the way we have opened our borders, you still not have a lot of people coming in because of the travel restrictions, and also some health concerns, because if people, for example, have some pre-existing conditions, and with the fact that the virus has not really been able to be contained, in the sense that we don't have a vaccination for it. So
Yeah.
on an individual level, people may have their concerns for traveling, but then also on a country to country level, with all the border restrictions, the sector has taken a dip, but in a way, the country is trying as much as possible to try and build up and try to see what can be done to sort of try and bring things back, not really to normal, but to a much better position than it was maybe in the past 3 or 4 months.
Okay. Yeah, quite true comments you're making, especially like it's not just a Tanzania issue alone, even with the borders open. I mean, people may not be traveling at this time, and maybe for some time, before people just seriously consider going to be tourists in another country, for health concerns, and also possibly because economically may not be the time people want to travel right now. But Ethiopia, Fitsum, is it the same? And other than tourism, what's like Ethiopia, especially the airline, what's the situation like?
The tourism sector is almost down all over the world. Similarly, in Ethiopia, it's affecting the tourism sector and the hospitality sector similarly. It's almost all the hotels are closed. The tourism sector is almost completely locked down. Even the Ethiopian Airlines is flying to some destinations. There's not that much incoming tourists. And in Ethiopia also, the tourism sector is not that much contribution. That does not have that much contribution for the economy. It's not more than 2% of the GDP. Even with in Ethiopia, we have 9 UNESCO heritage sites. Market is not that much grown. It's on the infant stage. Don't expect in the near future also that much tourism activity in the country.
Okay. And doesn't sound like tourism is such one of the big sectors in Ethiopia. What is there any kind of contribution from the services sector to a great extent to the Ethiopian economy, or is there any kind of service that contributes significantly to the Ethiopian economy? Or yeah.
Yes, mostly it's the financial and banking sector, and the travel is also has a big share on the GDP. And the tourism sector is contribution very small.
Okay. Then that means Ethiopia may not feel the impact as much when it comes to the impact of COVID on the tourism sector. And in Uganda, Emmanuel, what's the situation like? Is it closer to Tanzania or is it closer to Ethiopia?
Well, it's closer to Tanzania because, I mean, all our borders are still locked. I mean, the international airport is still under lockdown. So many services are still gradually trying to get out of the loop, the COVID-19 loop. But generally, tourism in Uganda is a great contributor to the economy because it's the country's leading foreign exchange earner. Yeah, it contributes approximately 1.4 billion US dollars to the country annually. And as I said, it's not any different from Tanzania because our greater strong point is having international tourism taking a center stage than domestic. Though over time, so many attempts have been made to ensure that both try to cope up. For example, over the years, you realize that so many tourist exhibitions have been going on. Part of Africa Tourism Expo that happens every year. That is for purposes of the international tourism bit. And then of late, before the COVID-19, of course, we had the Tulambule campaign. Tulambule is a Uganda word, which is loosely translated to mean let us tour.
Okay.
So that is meant to strengthen the domestic tourism sector.
So in Uganda then, has there been a very big uptake of tourism by the domestic side competitively to the international tourism?
The domestic tourism sector has tried picking up over the years.
Okay.
But it may not match the standard that the international tourism has set. I can give an example of you've heard of the Nyege Nyege festival.
No, I don't have as much detail about it, but I've heard about it.
Yes, it happens every year.
Mm-hmm.
So ever since the festival started, more domestic tourists
Mm-hmm.
have taken interest into moving around and trying to understand the aspects of the nation. So I think it's picking up.
Okay. So then, if I may ask then, with regard to with regard to like the government trying to, other than the promotion, which sounds like that maybe the tourism board in Uganda is undertaking to promote the tourism. Have there been any tax incentives that have been given to help promote the local tourism sector? And before COVID and during these measures that most governments gave to deal with COVID?
Mm-hmm. Now, most tax incentives aimed towards helping tourism sector have been this COVID situation. Okay? Even though we have made certain amendments to the tax laws, we have the president has not yet assented to them.
Okay.
So they are not yet binding, they're not yet into effect. Okay, so as it stands, they are merely what I should say, they are like proposals that are yet to come into force. But some of them include, of course, deferral of payment of corporate income tax, at least until September 2020. There is also deferral of pay as you earn, until 2020. Then the law also seeks to exempt VAT on hotel services.
Okay.
Especially hotel services and lodges up country. Then further, there is also exemption of VAT on construction materials for hotels. Okay, that's also another measure. Further, there is waiver of interest on tax arrears. There they are looking at the penalty and interest that would accrue over this time period. So they would be waived. And of course, expediting the payment outstanding VAT or VAT refunds. Those are some of the tax incentives that the government seeks to put in place in this COVID situation.
Okay, and those are the measures which seem somewhat to touch on the tourism sector, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's right. Right.
Okay, Jacqueline, for Tanzania, has there been any kind of measures that the government is trying to, pass to help with the tourism sector?
Unfortunately, there hasn't been any tax-specific measure towards the tourist sector. Whatever, for example, benefits or anything that someone could enjoy are the ones that were already in the laws as was before the COVID impact. So most of the measures that have been taken at the moment are more administrative measures just to ensure the compliance with all the health rules and just to give sort of assurance for all the tourists that are considering either coming in or just so to show them that that Tanzania could be a point of consideration. But in terms of tax incentive, there hasn't been anything that specific that has been introduced as a result of the COVID impact.
Okay. If I may mention, like, one of the reasons why this question on like what tax measures have been taken either now or to promote the domestic tourism, there was a point at which Kenya tried to help promote the tourism sector, and what they were doing is that they were offering any person, any company that or business that chose to like give a trip, a sort of like a trip or a holiday, arrange it for their employees, then they were going to get that as a tax deduction. And the aim was for them to, maybe individuals may not be able to go on a domestic tour, or for instance, like the Masai Mara. What what they were saying is that if a business pays for that, then they can get a tax deduction on it. But that was a few years back, and there hasn't been like a repeat of the same. And even with this COVID situation, like to help with the sector, it hasn't been done. But I think it could possibly help to encourage the domestic tourism. But Fitsum, if I could ask about Ethiopia, so have there been any measures that have been taken to help in the services sector, like the financial sector, which seems to be like the big one in Ethiopia? Over this COVID situation, what has been done to help the financial services sector?
There is no any that much specific industry sector measure taken by the government. Just the government has allowed if they make any losses, they can pay forward that definitely. And if for any long time over and due tax payments, the government also given an amnesty overdue tax payments.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that one, the government didn't make any such measures.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, the banks have tried to encourage tourism sector by cutting the interest rates for about 6 months. So they have tried to reduce their interest rate from 40-50% for the tourism sector. But from the government side, there is not that much action is taken.
Okay. I'm sorry, there was a point where I lost the connection and couldn't hear you clearly, but for the services sector, it doesn't sound like there's any specific measure that has been given to them, which is not common to any other sector, especially when it comes to like the amnesty. Yeah, what you spoke about, the amnesty. So the amnesty, anyone can actually take advantage of it. You don't have to be in the financial sector.
Yeah, it's not for specific sector, just for all businesses. The amnesty is for all businesses, and it's also if the companies have long overdue tax payments. So even all companies they could not have that much liability for the government. So it will let's say that it will help the tourism and the industry sector in general. I will appreciate the banks what they did. So they reduced their interest rates 40-50%. So it will be helpful this one for special tourism and the horticulture industry because it was affected mainly through the COVID.
Okay, that makes sense. Like the banks, the reduced interest. Okay, that makes sense. And if I may ask about, if I could go to Uganda, Emmanuel, and ask about like the employees, especially like with the tourism sector affected in however big or small way that it has been affected in Uganda, which I think, especially for international tourists, might be quite significant. Is there like any kind of employee taxes that have been given to help, rebates in the employee tax side to help manage the situation for employees who are losing their jobs?
To be honest, there is nothing that has been done to help the employees themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. However, the deferral on pay as you earn is on the side of the employer.
Okay.
So there is nothing for the employees specifically.
Mm.
But again, you see, for the employer's side, the deferral of pay as you earn is not hasn't been received well.
Why?
Because that would be equivalent to operating on a debt.
Okay.
It's a liability in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're deducting this pay as you earn, and you're going to remit it at a later date. Okay, it's quite problematic. But for the employee side, there is nothing really. There is nothing really.
Okay, but is it? Are the people going to pay even if there's deferral of the POIE obligation to remit the tax? Is there interest charged on that? Or why would that not be a good thing?
There is no interest.
Okay.
There are no interest. But of course, this applies to businesses that have been tax compliant over the time. So there are no interest or penalties that are going to accrue.
Yeah. Okay. That's quite interesting. And in Tanzania, Jackie, has there been any kind of tax benefits that has been given to employees to help them? Not like generally?
Well, the Finance Act of 2020 has given a bit of a relief, I would say, on the pay as you earn. There was some adjustment on not really on the percentage, but on the computation of pay as you earn, which ends up giving sort of a relief on employees. And then the tax band that is exempted from tax, which is the first band, the amount had been increased for, I would say, a rough of about maybe $50 from the amount that was there before to the amount that is actually exempt now. So I would say that's sort of the benefit that is there for employees. So it's a bit of a relief, but it's general. I would say it doesn't really have a timeline because it's just an amendment to the income tax legislation to sort of amend the PAYE bands, which has ended up having an advantage to employees.
Okay. Yeah, that's quite interesting to hear. But then it sounds like Tanzania, like if you compare the situation with Uganda and Ethiopia, it sounds like at least Tanzania is trying. Would you like comparably say that on the tax side, on the employee side, there's quite some effort that has been put to in Tanzania as opposed to Uganda and Ethiopia, from what you understand?
I think what I would say, maybe I wouldn't really say because based on what Emmanuel said, I think the measures are being taken maybe just from a different perspective, because from what I see from Ugandan side, I think that would help employers more than employees. And then yes, from the Tanzanian side, now it depends on how you look at it, because maybe an employer in Tanzania would have liked the same, for example, treatment is with what Uganda is getting with the deferral. But from the Tanzanian perspective, of course, an employee is much happier with a bit of a reduction, with a bit of a reduction or relief that we have ended up getting because of the adjustment that have been done in the computation. But I would say yes, I think it's a measure by the government, even though it was not explicitly said that it's a measure because of the COVID impact. But I think in a way it's a measure by the government to sort of try and help the people in even the smallest way possible.
Okay. I think for the country in general, I think you'd feel like there's greater help when it's going directly to the employee than employers, but I'm sure even employers would like to get some benefits. Fitsumi, if I could ask about like Ethiopia, because like the airline, Ethiopian airline, I mean, does quite a bit of business within Africa and elsewhere, Has there been any kind of incentive that has been given to the airline to help cope with this situation, or nothing at all?
Only all businesses, if they incur any loss in this year, they can carry forward indefinitely.
Okay. Well, that's a good one. That if they incur any losses.
So there's no specific for the airline industry. The airline trying to cope up with the effect of COVID by itself by moving from to the cargo industry. So overall, there is no specific measure taken for specific industry.
Okay, but that's a good one. Like if you make a loss, you're allowed to carry it forward indefinitely. That's a good one. I think that's a good one. Does Uganda have any similar thing to do with carry forward of losses at all in any industry?
I beg your pardon.
Okay, so because what Fitsum just said, which I think is quite a good measure, is that although like the airline or any specific, they're not getting any specific kind of incentives to them, they are now allowed to carry forward any losses that they make this year indefinitely.
Well, as for Uganda, that's not the position. However, that's a good one for Ethiopia.
Yeah, it is.
But for us, our airline is not so vibrant. So when I look at other sectors in general, that hasn't been put forward. Okay, so it doesn't accrue.
Okay, tell me for Uganda, other than like the tourism, the other service sectors that come top in contributing to the GDP would be which service sectors? Is it like Ethiopia, like the financial sector and that kind of thing?
Okay. Well, according to the African Development Bank, there are three major sectors that are the pillars of our economy. Number one being agriculture. Agriculture, of course, you're looking at the fisheries, animal husbandry, dairy, crop subsectors, which have contributed about 3.8% growth in 2019. And number two, you would look at the industrial sector. Industrial sector here, you're focusing on the manufacturing, construction, mining, and electricity, which have contributed to 6.2% growth in the economy last year, 2019. And the third being the services sector. There you would look at the wholesale, retail trade, telecoms, hotels, transport and communications, and the tourism subsectors, which have also greatly contributed to a tune of 7.6% growth in 2019. So those would be the three top pillars of our economy.
That was just out of curiosity. I was asking what these sectors are and what that contributes to the Uganda economy. But from what I understand, in Uganda, there hasn't been any specific measures given to the services sector. Like this is what the services sector should be benefiting from to help with the COVID situation. It's just general measures that if at all, if any that have been passed, any sector can take advantage of them, right?
Well, as I stated earlier, there are certain tax exemptions that have been directed towards the services sector. For example, the hotel service.
Yes. And
okay. But then the rest, any other sectors can tap in to derive a benefit. So it's about how you structure your affairs and take advantage of what the law allows you to benefit from.
Okay. I understand that, Emmanuel, for Uganda, especially on like what you said, the incentives that have been given to the hotel industry, when the incentives that they're getting. I understand that. But then to get maybe a bit more on like other sectors, like maybe ICT, like the technology sector and that kind of thing. Let's start with Tanzania. Like, is there, especially right now with the COVID situation, when a lot of things are happening online, is there any kind of either government allocation, the ICT sector, or any tax benefits that are being given in the sector?
Sorry, I think I lost you there a bit. Can you please come again?
Okay. So what I was saying is that for like the services sector, especially on like the internet and ICT technology kind of service, because right now like a lot is happening online. Has there been is there like any government allocation towards that, or like any kind of incentive to help in the sector? What's happening, or suspension of any tax on the ICT side?
In terms of suspension, I wouldn't really say there is much happening in that area. But what I have seen is, I think with the growth of ICT and most of the things in that sector, what I've seen is the move by the government to try and see how they can tap in what can be considered as revenue leakage that they could have or they could get from all these giants on all these ICT giants. So that's what I have seen. So what I've seen recently is the changes in laws that are more or less targeted towards the stakeholders in the digital economy. But in terms of benefits that are specifically for them, there hasn't really been anything as of yet, unless we tap into the benefits that would be there for any other investor.
Okay, quite understood. And in Ethiopia, from what the ICT sector like, is there any kind of tax benefits that are being given there, or government allocations to help boost your internet service providers, people within the digital side, and that kind of thing, or? In some countries, actually, they have just introduced digital taxes. Is that the situation in Ethiopia, or what's going on?
It's not like that. The IT sector is not that much grown in Ethiopia. It's almost everything is manual, and so it's not grown that much. And as you know, the internet service is also monopoly with the government, owned by the government. So there's no specific incentive given to them. The government is trying to encourage the IT sector, so it's trying to create industrial park for IT sector and providing some incentive, for example, customs duty exemption when they start business like that. But it's an infant stage for the IT sector, so it's very minimal the business.
Okay. So, but for like multinationals providing like digital services in Ethiopia, like Facebook, YouTube, Amazon, such kinds of people, what's the situation like? Are they being taxed or any of that?
No, they don't have an office in Ethiopia, and there's no digital taxation yet.
Okay, quite understood. Yeah, because for most people, except Uganda, who Emmanuel, you can tell us a bit more about. Most other countries, maybe who are still applying the old rules where someone needs to have like a business set up for them to be able to tax them for the digital services that they're providing their country. The situation will be much the same as Ethiopia. But then in Uganda, Emmanuel, what's the ICT sector like? Like especially your over the top tax. Is that what it's called?
Well, the over-the-top tax has been received with mixed reactions because it's looked at as an impediment to the use of digital services. But to say the least, digital penetration in Uganda is still very low. It's not something you can heavily rely on. However, the amendments to the 2020 law have come up with several incentives that target that sector. For example, there is an exemption of VAT on services for the supply of software and equipment installation. Okay. The amendments also go ahead and provide for exemption of VAT on services incidental to telemedical services. Okay. So all these are tech related, ICT related sectors. Then lastly, there is also an exemption of VAT on royalties paid in respect of agricultural technology.
Okay.
Now, if you look into this, this is a great boost to the rising number of agri-fintechs in Uganda. There are so many fintechs coming up. Okay, the digital penetration is going up, but it's still very low. So when you look at the impact of the OTT over-the-head tax, generally it's really a challenge to some of these, but those are the incentives we have for now.
Okay.
That have come up.
Okay, and these incentives have been ongoing for how long have the incentives like paying of royalties, the royalties for agri-tech and VAT exemption on software? How long have those been? Have they been recent? What's the range?
These exemptions, they are just amendments that have been passed by the parliament, but they are not yet. They don't have the force of law. Okay. Because there is the presidential assent pending. So upon the presidential assent, that's when they will come into force. But they haven't been there previously.
Okay. Is it okay? Okay.
So basically, they have come during this COVID situation.
Yeah. Okay. But that's quite a good one. I mean, I would assume it's just that it's the presidential assent that hasn't happened, but they are pretty good to go.
Yes. Yeah? Yes, that's it.
Okay. For someone who may not know about like over the top tax in Uganda, from what I understand it, Emmanuel, if you could explain a bit about it. It's like a tax you pay to get access to the internet.
Okay. Over the head tax is a tax that is aimed at social media. It's also known as social media tax. So it's aimed at social media services on the internet. Okay? The value of it is about, if I may say, a month, you pay slightly less than $2. That's about 6,000 Uganda shillings. Okay? So it's levied on every social media platform that you would like to visit. For instance, if you're to say maybe Facebook, if you're to say Instagram, if you're to say all those other online platforms are all covered by this over-the-head tax. That is it in short.
Okay. Cool, which is quite interesting. I find the approach Uganda has taken quite unique. I doubt it's the same in Tanzania. Jackie, is there any like social media tax in Tanzania? And I'm digressing.
Not really. I think what has been done is the target on the giant really. So we have a VAT law that came into operation in 2015. And one of the things that they targeted in the electronic services is basically the taxation of the services that are being provided. And I think what they were trying to do is, since it is hard to sort of get part of the revenue that is being generated from Tanzania by these giants, they decided to target it from that perspective. So basically what the law says is if electronic services are supplied to a person that is in Tanzania using the services, then that's it. That there's a tax purposes of in Tanzania, which then puts liability for the supply of those services. So you're talking about your Netflix, Amazon, and all these guys. Talking about them having to register for VAT in Tanzania through a representative.
Jackie, I'm sorry, Jackie. There's a point which like it wasn't too clear what you're saying, but we get the gist of it. But there's a part where you came in and out when you're speaking about like from the VAT representatives having to register in Tanzania. But I think it's quite understood the approach that Tanzania has taken, which I think is quite common for charging of VAT on this Netflix, Amazon, and those types of people. Yeah. So if I could go to here, maybe on the next thing, especially, I noted like there's been much talk, especially like from the OECD on tourism and what COVID will do, and they're encouraging countries to look more inwards. Like if the hotel industry is going to survive, it has to be the domestic market sustaining it. Like people within the domestic market sustaining it. And now that's what, especially the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, where most countries, like 30 African countries have signed and ratified the instrument, and they should come into force. So if we could have like a quick final thoughts, maybe just speak a bit about that. What's like your view on more having intra-Africa tourism as opposed to more non-African international tourists? And like for instance, for Uganda, is there much more, especially the East African community, more people within Africa increasing in the tourism? Any talk about that?
For the intra-Africa tourism aspect, what the East African community has tried so much to achieve is by promoting the free movement of people and goods across borders. So this points to the cornerstone of any tourism, the free movement of people. So that is what the East African community has tried to do. For example, when you look at the standardization of travel documents, the visa systems, you do not need, there isn't so much documentation when you're moving within the East African community, which I think is a boost for the domestic tourism sector within the community. And then when you look at our borders are still well, for now they are closed, but earlier on, they are operating within the same standard measures. So I think the East African community has done quite a job.
Yeah, okay. And maybe Jackie, on actually, because Tanzania is also part of this, any talk or any thoughts towards like having like intra-Africa tourism increase, and maybe tax measures that could be used to encourage this area. I know, like possibly within the EAC, like if maybe you take a trip across EAC, you should maybe get like a tax incentive. Any thoughts about that?
I would say, well, pretty much I would echo what Emmanuel has said in terms of what has been done within the East African community. So automatically that affects Tanzania as well. And in terms of talks, we have seen the Tanzania Tourist Board talking about that the intra-Africa, sort of promoting the intra-Africa tourism, and seeing that there have been discussions, I think, across the continent on some of the expos that were happening before COVID on how to support that and how to encourage it, since it had become clearer that West Africa was still becoming a preferred destination for tourism. But I think there's an issue of, yes, from a country perspective, there's so much that the country can do in terms of allowing maybe free or easy movement of people. But then, like the discussion we had initially, in terms, for example, like the impact of COVID now, at the end of the day, it also goes down to an individual decision, because there are that can do it, but then there are those cultural, I would say, maybe cultural biases where maybe you find most Africans want to go maybe elsewhere, Europe or elsewhere, because of tourism, and them wanting to come more. But the country perspective, I think they are to promote that as much as possible internally and within Africa, of course.
Yeah, I actually agree. And personally, I like coming to Tanzania. I would like to go to Tanzania more than maybe somewhere else. But I think there's also the cultural bias where you don't feel maybe you should arrange a serious trip and, like tour across Africa as someone would want to arrange a serious trip to go on a Europe tour. I mean, I think there's a cultural bias as well. Ethiopia fits. So, I mean, I think Ethiopia, there's a lot that someone would need to ask, especially on technology, and then we'll come back to like tourism. On technology, what any tax incentives that you think would help the technology sector, other than maybe also what are your thoughts about the government being the monopoly in providing internet in Ethiopia? Is that a good thing, or is it not?
For the telecom sectors, they're planning to open to foreign entities, so we expect next year there could be some additional entrants, like Vodafone, Safaricom, they're expecting. But definitely it will take time to grow this, and in fact, so don't expect it that much grow fast. But the government is trying to promote, so as I mentioned, they're trying to give exemption on import duties, customs duty, and they have specifically created an economic zone for the ICT sector. But the response from the investors is not that much, so it will take time to grow the ICT sector in Ethiopia. The globalization to affect the country. So I hope a lot of the sector will grow up fastly, but you will not see within 2 or 3 years. You will not see that much change. I don't expect that much change in this sector.
Okay. And tourism, how is it? Because Ethiopia has some really good, like history, and there's a lot of tourism that could be done. I mean, Ethiopia could come easily next to Egypt in tourism. If you could share any thoughts on why the tourism sector is not like such a key sector in Ethiopia when one would think it should be.
Mainly it's because of the infrastructure. There was not that much international hotels, tourist destination areas. the infrastructure, the roads, the lodging is not that much grown in that areas, in the destination areas, and the government was promoting the industry properly. As you mentioned, we have an history of 3,000 years, and there's 9 UNESCO registered World Heritage Sites, but it was supposed to be a high, she was supposed to contribute highly, but the government didn't get that much emphasis on the tourism sector. It's not grown. But at this time, it's trying to promote it properly. There is a sector established to promote that industry and try and provide incentives for new entrants. So I'm expecting the new future to grow properly. So the growth is high. There's around 30 to 40% growth rate in the industry, and the local tourism sector is also, it's not that much. The domestic we don't have that much culture for tourism. I think it's all out on the Africa side, I think so. But the international tourism sector is growing fastly, so we hope it will grow up.
Okay. Understood. And I actually thought of the top countries affected by the low tourism, it would be Ethiopia. To my mind, I thought because of like the heritage sites and all that, I thought tourism contributes a significant part of income to Ethiopia. I'm quite surprised it's not. But so again, I digress. But which is the main top sector that contributes to Ethiopia's GDP?
The service sector contributes around 40%, but as I mentioned, it's on for the bank, the financial sector, and other sectors which contributes that much.
Okay, thanks for those insights. We normally like at this point, if any of you, possibly if Emmanuel, you have any question you'd like to ask Tanzania or Ethiopia or the other way around, if anyone has anything that they would like to ask or get more information about, then you can, as you give your final remarks. I'll start with you, Emmanuel.
Okay, thank you so much. It would be rather a comment that goes to maybe Ethiopia. I think what Haley was saying was that their top earner to the economy is the financial services. Okay? Is that correct?
Yes.
So I would like to understand, or I seek enlightenment of the position of agriculture in Ethiopia. What is it like?
Yeah, especially if you see the agriculture, which is one of our main export products in the country, especially the coffee, and it will contribute. Also it has some parts of big GDP contribution, similar to the financial sector. It will not be that much, but the country is heavily. Our population, more than 75% is in the agriculture, so there's a high contribution. But it's a small scale agriculture mostly in the country, so you will not see that much. Our export is mainly on that, but on GDP you will not see that much stronger than the financial sector and other sectors.
Okay.
Emmanuel,
well, in my final remarks.
Yeah, but you should probably also have a further chat with Fitsum on Ethiopia and try and understand a bit more. Yeah. So what are you?
Anyway, due to time, in my final remarks,
yeah.
You see, with the prevailing public health threat, most tourism sectors will be left grappling with restoring their shine. But regardless, the taxman shall not be halted from collection of taxes. I mean, if you look at the Ugandan perspective, this explains why Ugandan tax authorities have opted for deferral of tax liabilities rather than waivers. So maybe I may put it to you, or I may put it to the floor, that what would be the better position, deferral or tax waivers? That would be it.
Okay. I will give my thoughts about that after everyone speaks. But Jackie, if I could come to you, if you have any question or any comment you would like to make on either Uganda or Ethiopia, and then you can also give your final comment.
I appreciate everyone. I think I've kind of gotten a thing or two that maybe I would pick up the conversation later. So maybe I'll just go straight into remarks. And I think from being tax biased, I think from a tax perspective, also from the Tanzanian side, more, I think one of the challenges that we have for the tourism sector as a whole is the multiplicity of taxes, which we have seen even some of the executive officials from some of the biggest stakeholders in the industry trying to bring up that something has to be done in that area. And this was even before the COVID impact. So seeing that even after the COVID impact, there still aren't very strong measures that have been taken. I think there's something to be explored in that area. But that Manuel had put to the floor in respect to whether what would be beneficial between a deferral and a waiver of taxes. And I was saying that I think deferrals are tricky in the current circumstances because we don't really know when things are going to get back to normal in court. And from a business perspective, if I'm deferring a liability and I'm not even sure about how things are going to, how and when things are going to turn around, if at all they will, it's still tricky. But from a government perspective, also, you understand these are developing countries, so waivers are also tricky. So if I'm to, based on one side, I'll go for a waiver, but not really a full waiver. So maybe a certain percentage of a waiver in order to sort of give these businesses a for them to continue and try to build up from there.
Okay. And Fitsum, if you could possibly give a comment to either Uganda or Tanzania, and also your final remarks.
All right. I don't have that much comment actually. So, but I'll go for the money and the management. So it's tricky on the deferral and the waiver. Tricky point, but I would suggest a combination of both. You know, sometimes you have to create a wave. It could create some inequality on the distribution of the wealth. So I would suggest a combination of both for the waiver and deferral.
Okay. Yeah, I also think on the waiver, I think most businessmen would like to get a waiver, you know. And I will have to say, like on Kenya, what they have done is, although I don't think this is related to COVID, but if you make a voluntary disclosure of any tax liabilities that you have from for the last 5 years, then you get 100% waiver of your interest and penalties, provided that you pay your principal tax. But then they also allow you an easy plan of how to pay it. So they tell you, like, if you're unable to pay it within the next, like, give us a payment proposal, and then we will allow you to pay for whatever period of time that you're able to do. So they're sort of trying, like, to give a waiver on the interest and penalties, like almost like give a sort of amnesty, which is, I think, what Joseph mentioned, like there's an amnesty in Ethiopia. And in past discussions, like also Zambia has also given like an amnesty. And so I think a waiver would work best, like 100% waiver of taxes, that would work best. But I don't think, because of the government also needs revenue, I don't think that's likely something that the government would consider doing. Even if I think it would also help to reduce the tax rates, try and reduce the tax rates, and especially like corporate tax, employee tax, like try and just really reduce it or take it a bit lower, which some countries have tried to do. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I liked this discussion. I completely enjoyed it, and I hope you too did enjoy it. And then the other thing I would like to mention is that because of how much tax discussions that have been going on so far, there's been, every time we have this discussion, a feeling that there should be like an African tax practitioner forum where people can, exchange ideas, get to know a bit more about each country. And I've taken it upon myself to build that network. So I will reach out to each of you guys and possibly have these
That would be
conversations
great.
going. Yeah. Sorry?
That would be great. That would be great. Share ideas.
Yeah, I also agree that would be great. But thank you, Emmanuel, very much for joining in. Jackie, thank you so much for your time, and Fitsu, much appreciated. I'll share this once it's done, and I'll share it on YouTube.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, cool.